Hello and welcome to the Baja Barn Jacket sewing video, tutorial, sew along, whatever you like to call it. Here are some of my testers in their completed jackets. This pattern is intended to be oversized with room underneath for hoodies, chunky sweaters. The action back is a fun feature that allows for extra movement of the arms. The hem should fall at your low hip. And yeah, there's a ton of information in the pattern, but let's get started on the video. So here are all the pattern pieces. There's quite a lot, so be sure to use the pattern piece inventory to keep track. The first step is going to be to take your center back piece and your back extension and place them right sides together, matching the triple notches. So there will be 3 notches for you to match up, so that with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then press the back extension piece flat like this and then all the way around to the back. I like to make sure it's pressed so that the back extension isn't going to be visible from the right side or the center back side, and then I'm going to top stitch 2 rows just along the edge there. And here's what that looks like now from the right side and the wrong side. And then I'm going to grab my back armhole piece and place it right sides together with the back extension piece, matching that single notch now. And I'm just stitching together the back armhole and the back extension. I'm not stitching the center back at all. And then I'm going to just press it flat and in place. It just tucks right behind like that, and you have that extra space to move your arms. Now I'm going to stay stitch it just so in a future step I don't miss any of my layers. And then this is how I'm sizing my elastic, just in between those stitching lines, and I'm going to stitch it down on top of where that notch is. And it's as simple as that. That way when my back extends, that elastic will snap it back in place. Now I'm going to grab my center front pieces and line up the shoulders. Since I stay stitched, I don't have to worry about catching my back extension pieces in there. They should be nice and situated in place. I'm going to press my seam allowance to the back and then top stitch 2 rows on the back from the right side with my top stitching thread. And now I'm going to grab my sleeve front and my sleeve back. I'm going to line them up right sides together, make sure I have a sleeve front and a sleeve back together. And then I'm going to sew just down to the dot that I marked and snip to the seam allowance, or through the seam allowance, to the stitching line. Do not snip through your stitching line. Then I'm going to press my seam allowance to the front sleeve. So the front sleeve is the bigger sleeve piece, and I'm going to press it to the front. And then, so in this version of my jacket, I did the vent wrong, but I'm going to show you the right way to do it with this little half sleeve that I cut out. So here I am, I've stitched and I'm pressing to the front sleeve, and then I am going to take my back sleeve extension and fold that little flat piece in 3/8 of an inch, and then again 3/8 of an inch. I'm just moving that front sleeve out of the way to give you a little better visual, and when I do that, it's going to be kind of hard to show here before it's pressed, but one folded edge will line up with the stitching line, and the other folded edge will line up with that seam allowance that I have pressed to the front. So I'm going to go press this in place, and then you'll get a better visual on it instead of me just holding it down. But you're only doing 3/8 inch folded and then another 3/8 inch folded, and then that's what it'll look like. So one folded edge lined up with the stitching line, the other folded edge lined up with the raw edge of that seam allowance on the upper sleeve. And now I'm going to do the same thing with my front sleeve. I'm going to fold it under 3/8 inch and then fold it again 3/8 inch. And since the sleeve extensions there for the vent are different sizes, when you have folded both of them 3/8 inch, they will overlap on top of each other. There should not be like a split or like a gap in between. They should line up right on top of each other. So fold that front piece 3/8 inch, 3/8 inch again, and again that folded edge will line up one side with the stitching line and one side with the raw edge. So here it is all pressed in place, and you can see that those folded edges of the vent line up right on top of each other. They each have one edge lined up with the raw edge and one edge lined up with the stitching line. And again, they are right on top of each other. And you're just going to pin this or clip this in place for now, and we will finish up this part when we get to the lining in a later part of sewing the jacket. But just have that set up now and ready to go. It's much easier to press it now versus later, but this is how it should look, and it should not look like this. This is where I messed up, and you can see my vent is like it splits open, there's no overlap. But anyway, now I'm going to top stitch on the front sleeve side, 2 rows down to that dot, so stopping right before the vent, and I'm going to do that for both sleeves. And now it is time to attach the sleeve to the jacket, so line up that center notch to your shoulder seam allowance, line up the edges, and then you can line up the back notches and the front notches. I just like to pin it in place, and if you're having trouble easing your sleeve into place, it is very easy to do it in the round like this. So you just shape the shoulder around, the sleeve fits nicely in there, and you should really have no issue. The sleeve fits perfectly, but if you want that shaping, kind of makes it easier to sew sometimes. So then I press my seam allowance to the jacket body, and I'm going to top stitch 2 rows on the jacket body side, so on the front and the center front and the center back. And then I'm going to fold my jacket right sides together, so the front and the back are matched up right sides together. The front and back sleeve is matched up right sides together, and I'm going to sew that underarm and side seam right now. And then I'm going to press that to the back, and this part, top stitching, is going to get a little tricky, but you can totally do it. There's enough ease throughout the sleeve. We are going to top stitch 2 rows on the back side of the jacket and the back side of the sleeve. And a little trick I do, it's not really a trick, but I always start from the hem, and then I sort of just shimmy my sleeve through and make sure there's no bunching up, so I'm not stitching on more than I want to. I'm not going to stitch the arms together or anything, but and it sort of makes a bowl if you're pushing through and then sort of bowling out that sleeve. I don't know if that makes sense, but creating almost like a bowl has made sense to me for some reason. I don't know if that helps you or not. Just take your time, you can do it. And it looks nice with the 2 rows top stitched there. Okay, now let's move on to the pockets. We're going to take the chest pockets and the front pockets, both of them, and I'm going to fold them down 1/2 inch to the wrong side and 1/2 inch again to the wrong side. And now I'm going to top stitch 2 rows across to hold that in place. And now it's time for the big pocket. So I have my lining big pocket and my main fabric big pocket, and I'm going to place them right sides together and stitch only along that straight edge. Then I'm going to press them open like that, and then press it behind wrong sides together, and I'm going to press so that my main fabric shows a little bit more than my lining. I don't want to be able to see my lining at all, and then I'm going to top stitch 2 rows to hold that in place. Now I'm going to place my front pocket wrong sides down to the right side of my big pocket, and I'm going to stitch all the way around the curved edge, all the way up to that straight edge for all of my pockets, and that's going to create just like a guide for when I'm pressing that raw edge under. And for the big pocket, it's really going to hold the front pocket in place as well as create that guide of when I'm pressing that raw edge under for my pockets. Now if you have bulky, thick fabric, you can definitely grade that seam allowance down at the bottom edge of your big pocket. I am doing just the big pocket, so I have that front pocket that I'm not trimming down. That way the seam allowance from the front pocket is going to fold over what I'm cutting off of the big pocket. So you're going to have just less fabric to sew through when you go to sew your pocket on. It's just it creates less bulk if you have a sewing machine that you're worried about getting through the bulk of these pockets with the lining. But here we are, we've just pressed under the seam allowance, following that guide that you stitched on, and now we're going to take the pocket flaps, place them right sides together, and I'm going to sew around just the curved edge, and then I snip into that curve just so I can get it to lay a little more flat. You can grade the seam allowance down if that works better for you. Now let's flip them right sides out and press well, and then I'm going to top stitch 2 rows on whatever side I want the right side to be. So as you can see, I did my main fabric for both sides of the flap. So my top stitch side is going to be my right side, and that is going to go right side down onto the big pocket, and you're going to be just like a 1/2 inch above your front pocket. Sew that in place, and then sew 2 rows of top stitching on top, and that's going to hide your raw edge right in there. So see, when I flip the flap, you have no more raw edge. It's hidden in your top stitching. And now your big pockets are done, and we're going to use the markings from the pattern to place our pockets on. and I'm just measuring to be sure I marked everything properly and it's all even. And the reason I like to put pockets on after the jacket is almost fully assembled is because you can then try on your jacket. See if you like the pocket placements. Move them if you don't. Keep them if you like them. If you shortened your jacket, you're going to definitely want to try it on and make sure you like the pocket placements. So to put my pockets on, I top stitched just around that top edge of the big one, and then I pin the flap up and go around the bottom edge. For the chest pockets, you can go all the way around, sew them down, and then afterwards I put bar tacks in these positions just for a little extra reinforcement. And now it's time to start on the collar. Let's place them right sides together and sew up the front edge of your collar and around that longer rounded edge of the collar. I'm going to snip the corners down, and then I am going to flip right sides out and press it well, and then I will top stitch. Now if you used lining or a different fabric, just know that your top stitch side, the side you top stitch from, is going to be the right side of your collar, the side you want facing up. Now I'm going to place the collar onto the jacket with the right side of the jacket facing up and the right side of the collar facing up. So the top stitch side of the collar is facing up, and I am going to sew that in place with just a scant 3/8 inch seam allowance just to hold it in place for now. Now we're going to take our back facing and front facings and put them right sides together and sew that little shoulder seam, press it open. Now I'm going to take my double fold bias tape and unfold one edge and sew it to the wrong side of my facing, then fold it around to the right side and then stitch it down on the right side. Now I have that fun bias tape finished edge of my facing. Now I'm going to line up the bottom edge of my facing to the bottom edge of my jacket, and there should be a gap at the top, so the top of my facing is not going to match the top of my jacket, and that is intentional. So just sew the bottom edges together with the 3/8 inch seam allowance and press that seam allowance to the jacket wrong side. Now I'm going to match up that top of my jacket to the top of my facing and pin it down. When you get to the bottom, you'll notice that there's a fold. That is intentional. That is on purpose. Sew straight down that right over those folded edges, straight down on the folded edge. It might feel wrong at first if you've never done this way before, but trust the process. Then I'm going to snip those corners off and poke them right side out with my little point turner, and you'll see that that 3/8 inch seam allowance is now starting the fold of your jacket hem, and then that offset is now the bigger fold of your jacket hem. So basically it just starts the fold of your hem, which is 3/8 inch and then 1 inch, and just press that all the way around your jacket. And now we're going to start on the lining. So this is the back lining. I'm just folding it right sides together where those lines are that you should have marked on your lining. If you haven't marked it, mark it now. You're going to just put right sides together and sew straight down that line about 3 inches. It's basically like a pleat. You can press it whichever way you would like. You don't have to press it like a box pleat, but you can. You can press it in, you can press it out. But the important thing is just sew about 3 inches down. Match the lines up like you were sewing a pleat. And now we are going to take our front piece. So I have my front pieces still, I think they're wrong sides together, so my front pieces are right on top of each other, and we are going to trim 1.5 inches from the front, the center front, and 1.5 inches from the bottom hem. The reason I'm having you trim instead of having a totally different pattern piece is because I didn't want to waste paper, and it is such a simple adjustment to make the lining piece for this jacket. So I'm just having you trim off 1.5 inches from the center front and the hem instead of having you print another, who knows, 10 pages of paper. Anyway, it's simple enough. You can do it. So now we're going to place the lining pieces right sides together, line up the shoulder, and sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to press my seam. You can press it back or you can press it flat if you want less bulk. And then I'm going to take my lining sleeve, place it right sides together with my jacket. I'm going to line up the shoulder seam. I'm going to line up the ends. I'm going to line up the notches. And we are going to sew all the way around. Now I'm going to fold my front piece right sides together with my back piece and my sleeve right sides together to sew that underarm and side seam. I like to match up the ends and then the shoulder seam at the underarm and the hem at the bottom, and we're going to sew this seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, of course. And then we are going to start placing the lining into the jacket. So you want wrong sides together, and I'm just putting my hand through the sleeve and sliding it to the end of my outer jacket. And you're going to want to line up that neckline. The neckline of the lining has not been trimmed, so your neckline should line up with the raw edge of your main jacket neckline edge. It'll stop 1.5 inches shy of your center front. And we're just going to pin this lining, or pin or clip this lining in place all the way around the neckline. Then I like to find the underarm seam of both the lining and the jacket and line that up, and then I will start to smooth things down. So line up that junction right there on both the lining and the main jacket, pin it in place, and then I'll try and follow that side seam down my lining and my main jacket and hold it in place. And then I'll just start to smooth the jacket lining out to match with the main jacket and make sure everything just lines up and is going to tuck right into the hem, tuck right into the facing. I find this method of lining the jacket to be a lot easier and a lot more user-friendly rather than sewing the lining right sides together with the facing and around the hem and having to flip it out. I just find this easier because you can visually see that your lining does fit where it fits. If there's any extra bunching, you can smooth it out. And it should fit just fine. It'll have a little gap to reduce bulk at the center front and then a little gap at the bottom. Your lining should not fold over with your hem. It should just tuck right into the fold, actually, where the second fold is. And it should just fit nice and smooth in your jacket without having to sew it in some crazy confusing way. So now I'm going to finish up the neckline by pinning it all together. So you'll have the facing, the collar, your main jacket, and then your lining. And I'm pinning that all the way around the neckline because I want to sew this neckline together to make sure I can hold all of these pieces in place. Okay, and after sewing the neckline, I'm going to want to snip that center front corner. That way when you poke it right sides out, you can get a nice crisp center front corner. And I will use a point turner, but you can usually just shimmy the corner on out with your fingers, like I'm doing here. And I'm going to press this so that my facing is now facing my lining. So the wrong side of my facing is now touching the right side of my lining. And I'm going to start pinning that facing down along that bias tape edge onto my lining. And the best way I have found to do this around the neckline is to hold your neckline in a rounded shape as if it's on your body, because your body is rounded at the shoulders. And then I'm going to sew a basting stitch all the way around my facing edge and my hem. And then I'm going to go over that with my top stitching thread. You can stitch right next to your basting stitch, and that way you can just snip your bobbin thread on your basting stitch and slide it right out, and you're left with your pretty perfect top stitch finish around your facing and your hem. But yes, it really helps if you hold that shoulder area curved. That way you don't get any puckering around there. Now I'm going to line up my sleeves, so my sleeve lining and my main jacket sleeve, and I'm going to line up the underarm seams and just hold that in place with a pin and smooth it around. You should have marked where you're going to cut your lining, but I like to do this as just a fail-safe anyway. Make sure you line up the underarm seam and then smooth the lining around, and you're going to trim up that line that should have been marked on your sleeve lining, but it's basically just straight up the vent gap. In which, if you remember from earlier in the video, I pressed my vent incorrectly here, so that's why there's a bit more sleeve lining and a gap because there should be no gap. You will not have a gap. I have a gap because I pressed wrong, like I said. Anyway, just trim up the marking on the sleeve lining, and then you're going to unfold one side of your vent and tuck that lining underneath the fold. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side of my vent. I'm going to unfold that part of my vent and just tuck my lining underneath the vent all the way up to where I cut, and just pin that back in place. And it's as simple as that to tuck your lining into your main jacket sleeve vent. And now what I'm going to do on the front sleeve is continue those 2 lines of top stitching down. And for the back, I prefer only 1 line of top stitching and then sew a bar tack. I did a box with an X, just whatever kind of bar tack you like. And you can see this is where I really noticed that I folded my sleeve vent wrong. That is wrong. Yours will not look like that if you do it the right way, how I showed you earlier in the video. But let's just move along to the cuffs now. You're going to fold one edge of 2 of your cuffs 3/8 inch up. Place that right sides together with a cuff that is not folded up. The cuff that you have pre-pressed that 3/8 inch seam allowance up will be what shows on the right side of your jacket. So now I'm going to snip these corners, flip the cuffs right sides out, and then start lining up the right side of my cuff that has not been pre-pressed up with the right side of my sleeve. So I'm going to start at the vent and the edge of my cuff and start pinning right sides together all the way around to the other side of my vent. And then I am going to stitch that together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure not to catch that fold of my cuff, the part that we pre-folded. So then I'm going to press the seam allowance up and bring my cuff down, lining up that pre-pressed edge of my cuff with the stitching line. And then what I'll do is sew from the right side with top stitching thread all the way around the edge. But what I honestly did was use the Wonder Tape, the wash away double-sided tape, to line up my cuff just perfectly. I really like the way my cuffs or waistbands or whatever turn out after I use the Wonder Tape. You just put everything right in place and it holds it and then it washes away. So then you stitch with your top stitching thread around the edge of your cuff. And now I'm placing my buttonhole markings. There is a guide on the center front main pattern piece. So I would use those unless you want to rearrange them. It's up to you. So my buttonholes punch through, line up my button placket overlap, mark for buttons, and then I used tape to hold my buttons in place on my marking. Then I sewed my buttons on and took all the little pieces of tape off. And then you're going to do the same thing for your cuffs. There is a buttonhole marking on your cuff pattern piece. That's what I like to use, or you can fold it in half, get directly in the center, and place your marking for the center of your cuff. You can do 2 buttonholes if you would like on your cuff. It's totally up to you. I just like the look of one big button on my cuff, but this is your jacket. You do what you like for your jacket. So same as the center front, so the buttonholes punched through, place the overlap. The overlap is up to you as well, so it's set up as long as you do your vent right, like I did not. For a 3/8 inch overlap, I like to overlap just a little more for a little more snug of a cuff, but it is up to you. Trim my threads, and there you go. That's the last bit, the last step of sewing your Baja Barn jacket. Now you have a completed Baja Barn jacket. That is no easy feat. Congratulations to you. I hope you absolutely love it, just like I love all of my Baja Barn jackets. Thank you for watching the video. I hope to see what you make. And if you do share it on social media, please do tag me. I would love to see it. And use the hashtag Baja Barn Jacket. And I can't wait to see it. I hope you really enjoy it. And congratulations if this is your first action back jacket. Well done. Thanks again for watching.